All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the Tampa Bay History Center and to our 14th annual Duckwall Lecture. I'm C.J. Roberts, the Frankie Duckwall President and CEO of the History Center. The Duckwall Lecture and my position are so named to recognize the wonderful support the History Center has received from the Frankie Duckwall Foundation over the years. You know, there aren't too many cultural organizations in our community that have not been supported by the good work and the generosity of the Duckwall Foundation. They have certainly made our community a better place to live. Joining us tonight, we have Mr. Sandy Reef, who has served both as a History Center trustee for many years, as well as a Duckwall Foundation board member. Thank you, Sandy, for all that you've done for the History Center and for our community. We are so pleased to have you all here this evening, and we're very excited about tonight's program. Our presenter, as many of you know, is a professional artist and ornithological aficionado whose meticulously etched and painted prints capture the grandeur, the beauty, and the biological details of birds. He has been a professional artist since 1979. His studio is here in Ybor City. While a student at the University of South Florida, he first studied the intaglio process, which involves carving metal plates to produce detailed prints. And inspired by the striking detail and painstaking intaglio process, the style that it produces, he mastered the technique and developed his own etching and unique style. His multi-dimensional and incredibly detailed hand-painted etchings take an average of 6 to 8 weeks to produce. And they result in some really intricately detailed prints, as you all can see here. Now, along with being a renowned artist, he's also a serious collector of bird illustrations. He's collected thousands of prints, including some that go back hundreds of years. We're very proud to feature his works and some of his wonderful collection of historic prints in the History Center's newest temporary exhibition, Etched Feathers, A History of the Painted Bird. And that'll be on exhibit here in our Wayne Thomas Gallery through October the 15th. It is a fascinating and truly beautiful show, and I hope that you all, if you haven't done so already, will come and see it. Now, please join me in welcoming Mr. John Costin.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here, and I really do appreciate the museum giving me this opportunity to share my work with you. The staff has been wonderful. They did a great job, and I'm real honored to have an opportunity to show my work here. Tonight, what I want to do is give you a little more information about me, what I do, how I make my work. CJ kind of explained some of the piece. I don't have to say a whole lot about my history now, so. But I'll start with this. This is a picture of Detroit, Michigan. This is where I was born, and I spent many years here. The birding wasn't that great. A lot of pigeons, but but it was an interesting place to grow up. The Ambassador Bridge is in the background. That's the bridge that crosses the Detroit River. You notice in the foreground, Highway 75. It's kind of unusual because I still live near 75. Real close, farther south, but I still live near Highway 75. But I've always had an interest in birds. When I was 8 years old, I grew up in North Georgia, and we had awesome hummingbirds there, woodpeckers. I was fascinated about the birds. It's always stayed with me. Here's a hummingbird that I find interesting. This is a calliope hummingbird. This bird's about 3 inches long. It has a brain the size of a pea, but it travels 5,600 miles every year. It's amazing. It'll start out on the western part of the country in Canada. It'll have its favorite perch. It'll fly all the way down to South America. Then it'll go back to that same perch in Canada. They have incredible memories. And that's one of the things I like about birds. They all have like specific traits or characters that are just fascinating once you learn more about them. This is a wood stork. This is a bird that many of you have probably seen in the area. One of the fascinating things about this bird is the speed of their beak when they open and close it. I don't know how biologists have measured this, but it's one of the fastest movements in the animal world. It's amazing. You know, it almost looks like a blender or something. If you see it feeding through the water, opening and closing its beak, it moves it so fast. One thing about Florida that's kind of neat, I mean, Florida, if you multiply that by 868 landmass-wise, that would be the amount of landmass that covers the whole planet Earth, 868. But at the same time, we have 1/20th of all the bird species in the world that actually migrate through here. So I think that's unusual. But when I do my pieces, I spend time out in the field. I research these birds. I'm fascinated by the color, the texture, their form, their habitat, how they interact with their habitat. These are 4 birds that you find in the area. On the top left is a snowy egret, noted by the yellow feet. Bottom left is a black skimmer. They have an unusual beak. The upper right is a reddish egret, and we have several of those that live in the area. It's one of the rarest egrets in North America. On the bottom is a Baltimore oriole, and some of these birds are hard to photograph. You know, they're hard to find. But here's a sandhill crane that was up close and personal. You know, this is in my neighborhood, almost in my front yard. So, and I take a lot of these photographs. It's amazing how close you can get to some of these birds. And you can see my sandhill cranes on the right. He was a great model. And here's a few other birds that we have in the area. Pileated woodpecker, you may have seen these. And then on the upper right's another reddish egret, but it's the white morph. That particular bird, about 15% of them are albinos. It naturally happens in the wild, where they still have a pink beak and blue legs, but all their feathers are white. And on the bottom right is a white-eyed vireo. This is a small songbird we have in the area that makes a great sound. Again, some of these birds are really hard to photograph because they're in the midst of the bushes and the plants, and you know, but occasionally you come across a bird that's much easier to photograph, like this one. This is my wife, Janet, and this bird was very photographic. This is a Florida scrub jay. It's only found in the state of Florida. Very unusual species. You see on its right foot it has a band on there. It's an endangered species, so biologists keep really accurate records on its, you know, its lifestyle, habitat. And not only birds, sometimes I travel and I see other things that are interesting to photograph. This was the largest prairie dog in the country. You know, I couldn't pass this up. This is my wife. She's standing next to the prairie dog. But now I'll talk a little bit about how I make my pieces. I start with taking a lot of photographs. I study the bird. I read about the bird. And in this particular case, this is a black-crowned night heron. I'll start doing some sketches like that on the left and decide how I want to pose this bird and what kind of environment that I want to put it in. And I think about the bird and where you would find this bird. This particular bird likes really dense vegetation. The Indians used to call this the yak bird because they would hear it back in the brush, but they wouldn't actually see it. So I wanted to create an environment that was really dense. There's something on every square inch of this particular environment for this bird. So that's why the environment is real busy. After I do this small watercolor, I use this as also a kind of a guide of how I want to etch my plates. Because on this particular piece, I use 4 different plates, copper plates, and I'll use different colors on each plate. So this will help in the planning stages of how to do this. After I make that small watercolor, then I'll do a detailed drawing. And the drawing is on the left. You can see how it's more detailed. life size. I blew this thing up life size. This is on vellum, a really fine rag paper. And underneath that paper is a plate with ground on it. I photographed the ground on the right. It's called soft ground. It's a real pressure-sensitive ground. It's like tar, but real pressure-sensitive. You can't even touch it. If you put your finger on it, it'll leave a fingerprint on it, and then when that's immersed in acid, it'll actually etch your fingerprint right on the plate. That's how sensitive it is. But I'll lay this vellum on there, I'll tape it down, and actually draw this drawing. I'll have to use a bridge. I can't touch it. I can't even put my hand on the paper because it would press against the plate, and then I would get false biting, where the acid would contact the plate in areas where I would not want that to happen. Here I'm doing my soft ground drawing. You can see the bridge there, and I'm working on the eye. And just this particular drawing here, I would say probably 50 hours worth of work just to do the drawing. It's what I call Zen drawing. You can't totally go by just visually what the grays and the values of the pencil that you're looking at. I have to go by the pressure. I have to think about how much pressure I'm putting on that pencil as it's contacting the paper. And that pressure will determine how much of that ground I'm lifting off the plate, which in turn, I'll show you in a few slides here, that will determine how it etches on the surface of the plate. This is a sort of a post of me doing a soft ground drawing on a small black and white warbler. And here I use a mechanical pencil because I can use a sharpener and get a really fine point on this pencil. And I use a hard lead so I get more mileage out of it. And here I'm drawing the details. I wish I could draw this fast. You know? That would be awesome, you know? But I can't. So, and you see some blue tape on the right. I've taped this paper down where it can't move. If it moves at all, it smears that ground on there, which in turn would affect the acid when it contacts the plate. And this bird is life size. It's a small plate, but I thought it would be a great sample to show you the drawing part of it. Okay, when I'm doing these drawings, I have a couple pets. And this is our pet Scooter. He likes to hang out with me and spend time with me. But if he decides he wants to walk across my drawing, it would be a disaster. I would have cat prints right across the surface of my bird etching. And he loves to spend time with me. So I had a problem here. What can I do to make him happy, but also I don't have to worry about him walking on my drawing? Here's my solution. So he's happy and I'm happy, you know, and he's he can hang out and watch me draw. And I don't have to worry about him walking on my drawing. Well, he's gone now. He's a great kitty. And I have another one, and I had the same problem. So here's my sandhill cranes, which is this one, the soft ground drawing. This one I probably spent 70 hours just doing the drawing. But this is my drawing, and my other kitty here, Terry, he likes to hang out here too. So I used the same method with him. He's a great kitty, so. But he's happy too. You know, I don't have to worry about him disturbing my drawing. Okay, this is what the drawing looks like after it's finished. You see all this tape on the border. I have to pull this tight like a piece of canvas. And then I've released the tape, and then here's the plate, what it looks like after I've placed a drawing on it. So you can see all those white areas. That's actually an area where I pressed on the paper, and the paper pressed into the soft ground. And then when I lifted the paper off, the soft ground stuck to the paper and exposed the copper underneath. So that's my drawing there. It's extremely hard to do. When that soft ground is on the plate, it has to be just the right thickness. If it's too thick, it won't be sensitive enough for my drawing. If it's too thin, then I get false biting where the acid would contact too many other areas. So it's a really difficult process, but the results are great. And at this point, then I'll etch the plate. I'll actually stick that plate in an acid bath. On the upper right is a solution of vinegar and salt. And what that does, it takes all the oxidation off of it. If you put a tarnished penny in there and just drop it in that bath and pull it out, it looks like a brand new penny. It takes all the tarnish off of it. And that tarnish will inhibit the etch, so I have to take all of that in there. Bottom left is me sticking that into the acid bath, and I have to agitate it. And then I have to clean it in stages, but I can't touch that ground. It's so sensitive. I actually use an air compressor, and I use that to blow the water off the surface of the plate. And I can't even use a lot of pressure with that air compressor because it'll actually blow the ground off and ruin the etch. Okay, and when I etch this, I etch it in stages. It's not like just one pass through the acid and I'm ready to go. The way the acid works, the longer you leave it in the acid, the deeper grooves it makes. The deeper the groove, the darker the line. So I manipulate the lines on my drawing by how much time I leave it in the acid. And I do it in stages by sticking in the acid for my light lines, which would be the upper left-hand corner. Those will be light lines. And then I stopped out part of it, then I'll stick it back in the acid for darker lines. And I'll keep doing this through stages. In this particular case, I did it in 4 different steps. So I have 4 different values of lines when I create this. I hope I'm not getting too complicated here. Okay, all right. And then after I etch it, I want to see what it looks like. To the left here, I'm putting ink on the plate, and I'm using a card. Here I'm wiping the plate off with a tarlatan. Actually, I brought a piece of tarlatan. Right here. This is cheesecloth, but it has a lot of starch in it, so it's stiff. So what I do is I actually roll this into a ball, and I try to roll it in such a way where the surface of it's hard, and I do a rotation across the surface of the plate. And what it does is it takes the ink off the polished areas, and it doesn't disturb the ink in the grooves. And that's how I make the etching work. So you're only seeing the area on the plate where the ink is in the grooves, but not on the polished areas. So that's what I'm doing in the middle picture. On the far right shows you what the plate looks like after I've buffed it down with this tarlatan. And here I'm ready to pull a print. Upper left-hand side is me adjusting the pressure of the roller. The etching press is basically a big plate that you see there, that stainless steel plate with 2 rollers, one on the bottom and one on the top, and it's motorized. And it turns and slowly forces the plate into paper underneath the rollers. It creates about 5,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, and it pushes that plate right into the paper surface. So the paper pulls all the ink out of the surface. An incredible amount of pressure. I actually designed that press. I worked with a machinist in Ybor City, and which is great. And actually, I have to tell you a little history about the press. You'll like this. I did this in my poor artist days. The roller is about an 8-inch diameter pipe. I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to find salvage parts for this. I went down to the port of Tampa, and there was a huge pile of scrap metal, all kinds of parts. And I seen these giant pipes there, and I thought, oh, geez, these look great for rollers. So I took those to my machinist, and he actually made my rollers out of them. And that pipe is actually Old Tampa sewer line. So it has historic significance. So, but that's how it's a great press. It does an awesome job. On the next picture on the right, here I'm placing the plate on the press bed. The next one I'm laying paper on top of it, and in the next one on the right I'm actually forcing the paper underneath the roller with the press. And on the upper left, I'm peeling the paper off the plate. You can see the image on there. I laid it on the press, and on the right you see more of a detailed image of the proof. Now this is just the first step. I probably go through 15 steps before this image is totally finished. You'll notice the variation in some of the lines. Some of them are real black, some of them are lighter, and that was determined by the amount of time that I put it in the acid bath. The darker crown lines, for instance, are real deep, and I may have had that in the acid bath for 20 minutes, where the lighter lines on the neck and throat might have been just 1 minute. So that's how I manipulate the value of those lines. And here I am doing an aquatint. This is an incredible process for making etchings. It's a way of making a flat tone on a copper plate. I take powdered asphalt, I put it on the surface of the plate, real fine powder, and then I heat it up with a torch. And I have to wear a mask because it's not real healthy to breathe that. This will kind of show you how it's done. Today I'm going to do an aquatint on this Botanitary warbler. I use a propane torch. You can't see the image on there now. It has a flat layer of asphalt on there, and I'm heating that asphalt up. And you can see how it's starting to appear. You see the image on there because that asphalt's melting and adhering to the surface of the plate. And that asphalt is so sensitive. I mean, I don't even like somebody opening the door when I'm in the studio working on that because the breeze could blow the asphalt and mess it up. This is an interesting story. When I was working on this plate here, I did an aquatint on the feathers, and it takes about 5 hours just to do the drawing to prep for that asphalt. Okay, and it's a huge plate. I have the dust on the plate. I'm moving, the plate weighs 26 pounds apiece. I'm moving this plate over to my metal grate where I heat it up with the propane torch, and my arm gently hit the edge of the plate, and the hairs on my arm disturbed the asphalt. I couldn't believe it. It ruined the asphalt. It was like 5-6 hours worth of work. Gone, just like that. So I had to clean everything and start over again. So what did I do? I ran upstairs, grabbed a razor, and shaved my arms. I never want to do that again. Interesting story, but what one will do for their art. So, okay, this is I'm etching my aquatint, and again the same thing. The longer I put it in the acid bath, the deeper the etch, and you can get incredible blacks with the process by doing that. And here I'm etching it in stages. So the first etch may only be 1 minute, which would be the upper left. The next one may be 3 minutes. The next one may be 5 minutes. This way I get this gradation of grays on the surface of my plate. And what I do, it's hard to see it here, but to tell where I etched that, I actually took that black tar, that ground, and I mixed it with white pigment. So it gave me various different degrees of gray, so when I painted on there, I could pretty much tell where it was at that time. And this is what the image looks like on the right when I did all those aquatints. Okay, here I am working on my plates. It's not a clean job. You know, I got dirty hands here. And not only do I use acid, I do a lot of direct work too. On the bottom left, I'm using a Dremel tool with a polisher on it to polish certain areas. On the upper right, I'm using a needle, I think, to rebuild some areas. I do a lot of handwork on these. When I etched these sandhill cranes, when I etched the feathers, they were too dark. And I had to go in there and spend a day and a half with the burnisher, just burnishing every feather to lighten it back up because it was in the acid bath too long. So there's a lot of handwork involved. Bottom right, here I am wiping the plates. I actually use my hand to polish some of those grays off the surface of the plate, which I'll show you in a minute. Here I'm inking one of the plates for my roseate spoonbill, the big large piece that you see on the front of the building here. It's a huge plate. And I'm applying the ink with a mat board. I use 4 different blacks on this, 4 different colors. Here I'm using a tarlatan to spread the ink on the surface of the plate. I'm applying a different color black, a lighter black, for the lighter feathers. Because all the ink's hand applied, I have that opportunity to use multiple different colors on each plate. Here I'm buffing it down with a tarlatan. It's a huge plate. You also notice it has a white sheen. I steel face my plates. After I make them, I put about 2/1000 of an inch of steel on there. I have an electroplating set up in my studio. Here I'm buffing it down with a tarlatan. Now here I'm doing something, I'm using my hand and I'm actually wiping my hand across the surface of the plate to take the tone off of there. This is the printing part of this particular print. This is the same series of images. It's the roseate spoonbill in flight. This is after about 2 hours worth of work wiping the ink on each one of these plates. This shows the printing process. This is after the first plate is went through the press. You can see the 2 colors on there, mainly the greens and the blues in the sky. I trap the paper underneath the roller so it doesn't move, and I just switch the plates. This is after the second pass. You can see the yellows and some of the watercolor. Now it's starting to come together. And this is after the last pass. It takes 3 people to do this, especially if one person has to hold the camera. So, but this is the finished piece. A lot of hand coloring on this. When it's first printed, the bird itself is in black and white. Then I come back with transparent watercolors. And as a basic rule of thumb, I print a lot of the colors in the environment, the sky, the water, the trees, but I usually hand paint the bird itself because the colors are more delicate and I need more control when I apply those colors. Here's me hand painting one of my small pieces, so it gives you an idea of what goes into these. This is a pair of loons. We have loons in Florida, but they don't look like this one when they're down here in the wintertime. They're kind of a drabbish gray. But the hand paint, there's a lot of hand painting involved. Each one varies. I mean, there's no 2 exactly alike. And I have to work fast for the water to blend and bleed. The blue lines on there are actually blue tape that I taped on there to act as a mask. Those are going to be painted blue later as like waves in the water. I also wish I could paint this fast. And this is what it looked like before I started. Now this is the second phase where I paint the blue lines in there. Now the birds are just black and white at this point, and I'm going to hand paint those too. They have an awesome call. If you've heard loons before, they make a great call. Here we go. That's the finished piece. Big difference. That's all hand painted. So all my pieces are hand painted. There's no 2 alike. Every one varies. This is my snail kite, Everglades snail kite. And this shows you on the left what it looks like after I printed all the colors. There's actually a pink sky that I printed, a blue on the upper part. The yellows are printed, the greens are printed. And then on the right side, all that's hand painted. I hand paint the whole bird. You see the yellows on the legs and the beak, the lores, the eyes. I even enhance the trees and paint some of the water reflections. So again, there's a big difference between before and after. And what I do with to keep my colors consistent, I try to approach it scientifically. I actually take my colors and I put them in syringes. And I do a chart that you see in the middle on the top. I actually document all my colors, how much paint that I use out of the syringes, in addition to how much water I use. So once I get a color I like, I can duplicate that color, because it's real hard to do it just by looking at it. So this way, again, it's a little more scientific, and you can see the charts there. To the right, these are hand painted, so I hang them up to dry sometimes. This is sort of the evolution of the black ground night heron that I was showing you earlier. This is the first etch, where this is the drawing that I did. This is where I started doing the background aquatints, where I'm putting gray tones in there, various different gray tones. And you can see how it's coming together. That big leaf on the right, you see it above the bird's head? I use an interesting process to do that. It's called spit bite. People find this fascinating. I actually take spit and I mix it with nitric acid and I brush it on the plate that's been immersed, a layer of water on there. And then when I paint this nitric acid on there, it etches the plate in such a way where it looks like a watercolor. It has a really soft edge to it. I have to wear a respirator. My brushes only last about 2 minutes before the bristles just melt. But it gives a great effect. And another thing too, I didn't really talk about this, but it's to do these, you almost have to be an engineer too. There's an underlying engineering part to these pieces. I actually have to predict how much the paper's going to stretch. I'm using 5,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. When that paper goes to the press, that's about 36 inches long. That paper is going to stretch almost 1/4 of an inch when it goes through the press. Have you ever looked at a newspaper where it looks like you need 3D glasses to really see what it looks like? Well, that's what would happen to my work if the registration wasn't right. It would, the colors wouldn't match up. So what I do is I actually calculate and predict how much that paper is going to stretch, and I etch my plates for the stretch. If I have 4 separate plates, they're all 4 different size, but they have to be printed in a certain order, with a certain amount of pressure, with a certain amount of soaking time. It's like a scientific experiment where all these variables have to be just right. If I change anything, it throws the registration off. If I'm printing my edition and it's raining outside, it messes up my edition, my registration, because it would affect the stretch. So, but I do this to predict the stretch, and then I use the information from doing this experiment to etch my plates. And this one, is a rough print. I just threw some color on there to sort of determine where I'm going to drop my colors at. I have to etch plates for each one of these colors. That green, I have to etch a separate plate for. The yellow's in there, I have to etch a plate for that. And there's a brown in there, and I have to etch a plate for that. So it's going to essentially be 4 separate plates. And then after I start working on these, I have to see how they align up when they're printed on top of each other. So what I'm looking for is information. There's different colors on each plate. I'm printing them on top of each other, and I look to see how they align up by using different colors of ink. And I try to use like high contrast colors so I can really see the difference between the red and the black plate and see how they line up. And then I use that information to etch my plates. Here I'm working on the yellow plate, and you can see some of the yellow printed in the background, and just to test it out and see how they align up. This is the yellow plate after I've spent more time on it. You see, there's a lot of yellows. This will eventually be all yellow ink. This is with the yellow and the green, and I think I have brown on here too. I printed all three of these, all four plates on top of each other to get an idea of how the registration is. You also notice at the top there's extra image on the top and the bottom. I leave all this extra space on my plates when I first make these, and to make adjustments on them. And then at the very end, when I feel that the image is finished, then I'll chop those areas off with a metal shears so they all match. Here, all the plates are, I'm using all the colors again, printing them on top of each other. You see on the top and the bottom that extra image. This is after it's been chopped, printed, and hand painted. This is the finished black-crowned night heron. And I don't know if you've ever been to Lake Wales before. When I used to skip school to go to the Bok Tower. I hate to say that. When I was in high school, friends of ours, there was 4 of us, we would go to Bok Tower. There's a lot worse things we could do than go to Bok Tower. But I learned about Edward Bok from going there, and I have a lot of respect for the gentleman. He was an early conservationist. He actually helped save Niagara Falls from becoming a big electric turbine for Thomas Edison. Edison wanted to turn that into a big dam and use the water power there to create electricity. And Edward Bok was able to get enough people to fight that, and they won. They stopped that. So, but one of the sayings that Edward Bok would use that I've always had a lot of respect for, and I also keep it close to heart. He said that wherever you're, let me think of it a second. Wherever your life may be cast, make you, the world, a bit better and more beautiful just because you have lived in it. And I've always liked that. So that's the end of it. And what I'd like to do is field any questions that you might have about me or the process. Yes?
When you say you make multiple plates, do you have to redraw each one?
I do have to draw them, not in the detail that I have to use on the key plate, but I do have to redraw every one of them. Absolutely, it's an incredible amount of time. I've been working on this piece since July, to give you an idea of what goes into these, and I'm just finishing it up. It's been months. So, yes.
Where did you learn the engineering technology that goes into it?
A lot of it's self-taught. I went to USF and I learned the basics of the process, but the rest of it's just trial and error and self-taught. I was going to be an electrician for years, or I wasn't. I was an electrician for years. I did. Yeah, right. Exactly. I did industrial control work, and I worked on buildings like this. I did electric there in large commercial buildings. And so there's this thought process of problem solving that sort of carried over to me actually working on pieces like this. There's a lot of planning involved, and that's why I do that small watercolor to start with, to sort of have a rough blueprint of where I'm going to drop my colors and how I'm going to etch my plates to do this. But again, a lot of it's self-taught. There's techniques that I've developed, and I constantly learn new things. Occasionally, I learn something and say, why didn't I do that 20 years ago? It sure would have made my life easier, But it's a learning process, a perpetual learning process. Yes?
Now, is anybody that does this beside me like what you do? And the second question is, do you teach this process to students?
I don't teach it. I had an opportunity one time to maybe become a professor at Hillsborough Community College, but this takes so much time and effort to do. I decided this is the route that I want to take. I want to do my own work as opposed to teaching others to do it.
Does anybody else do this?
Very few, very, very few. I'm probably one of the only artists in the country that's doing etchings of this caliber, with this kind of detail. I mean, there's a lot of artists that are doing birds, but nothing like this. This is like totally different. Yes?
Do you use the plates more than once, or is it just one? The plates are made specifically for one print?
Specifically for one print and one area, and every time I print one of these, I have to re-ink the plate. I have to, take that ink and actually hand apply it to the plate and buff it down with a tarlatan. So everyone, and it's a skilled craft just to print these. I mean, you probably noticed me wiping the plate and with the tarlatan, and actually I use the heel of my hand to brush across the surface to take the tone off of there. And I've been doing it for years, but even doing that, though, it's hard to make it real consistent. They vary from piece to piece. But it's a skilled craft just to do the printing. In the past, back in its heyday, which would probably be the 1830s, they would have professionals, that's all they would do is the printing. They would have people that all they would do is polish plates. They would have other artisans that would just transfer the basic line drawing to plate. They would do nothing else. That was they were pigeonholed to a certain part of the process. I'm doing it all. Even Audubon in the 1830s, when he did his images, same process. They were done in black and white, but he didn't do any of that work. It was all done by a whole staff of people that would come in and make those pieces. He didn't do any of that. So, yes?
John, you mentioned Audubon, and I know you collect vintage antique plants.
Sure.
Did you become interested in that once you began printing because you admired their techniques, or were you just attracted to the prints? How did that evolve?
It kind of went both at the same time. I had an interest in birds, so I started doing etchings of birds. And early on in my career, I loved to travel, but I couldn't make enough money doing it. So I had a little Toyota Corolla. I took the back seat out, so I had a big space. I put my portfolio in there, and I would drive around to different galleries and actually personally meet them and sell my work that way. I was sort of like a gypsy artist. But on one of my trips, I went to West Palm Beach. I met this gentleman. His father was an Audubon dealer, and he had a lot of Audubons there, Octavios. These are the small lithographs that were done in the 1840s. And I did a trade with him. I traded out, I got like probably 10 of them, and they're real collectible. But from that, and I read about those pieces, and it just started snowballing into my interest in antique prints, how they were made, the different artists and naturalists that would make those pieces, and it's just fascinating, that whole process of how they would do that. Sure.
My parents were in the printing business, and so the process of using the multiple plates just fascinates me of how you are able to keep them in register
It's
with
tough.
such a manual process, especially, as you said, with variance in the moisture in the air and the temperature and
Sure.
different papers, I'm sure, react differently to going through the press. So
Exactly.
do you end up having to make multiple tries to get a finished product?
I do. I
It
have
seems
to
like
do it.
you'd have a lot of failures.
I do have a lot of failures, and over the years, I've learned to capitalize on that and make those to a minimum. A lot of times, if I pull proofs, it's just small segments of the print as opposed to wiping the big plate. And then the registration that you're talking about, if you look at my pieces, all the multiple plate prints, on one of the long sides, halfway down, you'll see these little marks on there. They're perpendicular to the edge of the plate. And that's my point of reference that I use for registering my plates. And I leave that on there because I feel it's a signature of it being a handmade piece. I mean, I could get rid of that if I wanted to, but, I like leaving that on there. But, I talked about earlier about designing that etching press. I actually designed that press in such a way where I have a registration system that's built right into the press that I use. So I have devices that stick in there that are stable that I use to register my plates. And that makes it easier too, but it's a real tough process. And like you said earlier, I can't even change the paper type. I use arches on these. If I went to Rees BFK, which is a beautiful paper, my registration would be thrown off because it would stretch just a little bit differently. And like I mentioned earlier, it's like a scientific experiment. I have all these variables, and once everything works, I don't want to touch it, you know. I just want to keep printing because it's so difficult to, you know, to find out what the problem is. A lot of problem solving in this process to get everything to work. And then another thing too that I have to deal with is viscosity. That's the ink content, the oil content in the inks. When I'm using 4 different plates they're going through at a different time, the ink viscosity will affect how one ink sticks on top of the other. And if I don't get that, no, I print wet on wet. Wet on wet, that's why I have to deal with viscosity. When I print these, you probably noticed I trap the paper under the roller, replace the plate with another layer of ink and send it back through. So I'm printing wet on wet, and because of that I have to deal with viscosity. So the way the ink lays on top of each other, and then the first plate that goes through the press, the subsequent plates will actually strip off some of that color. So I have to think about that too when I'm etching my plates. You know, the order that they're going in and how the tonal value and where it's placed in the order of the other 3 plates when I'm creating. So again, there's that layer of engineering and planning that's involved. So, yes?
We have a mic for our audience online. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've got about 20 people on Zoom that would love to hear this question.
So that's obviously a very difficult process. So how often do the prints come out wrong?
Maybe it depends on the image, but on the average, maybe 1 out of every 15. But it has to be pretty bad for me to throw it away because I've learned over the years how I can correct problems. And you don't even know, never know it as a viewer looking at the piece. I use razor blades, I use Prismacolor pencils, paints, and I work on all of these directly anyways. So the ones that have issues, I just put more work into them. And I restore prints too, so I've learned through the years that I can touch things up and make it work where you would never notice it. You know, it's, and it has to be pretty bad for me to end up in the trash can. And I've had a lot of people say, well, I'd like to go through your trash sometime. You said there was, oh, sure.
We have some more questions. Mike is coming to you. Okay, who had their hand up first?
Do you have any idea how many copies you intend to make of these storks?
Of the sandhill cranes, yeah, I'm probably going to do an edition of 125. I think about pricing. I think about the work that goes into it, making them affordable. My prices are real reasonable for what they are, and all of those are issues that make me determine the edition size. I don't want to make them too large. Now, I mentioned earlier that I steel face my plates. I put about 2/1000 of an inch of steel on there. That makes the plate harder, so I can do a higher edition. But one of the nice things about the steel is it keeps my colors real bright. If you ever wear copper jewelry and they turn your skin green, well, that's what happens with ink when you rub it on copper. It oxidizes, and it's like mixing a greenish gray ink with your colors. So by putting steel on there, I get bright colors. But with the steel, I could also print 1,000 of these if I wanted to. I don't do that. I only, I determine what my edition size, and I adhere to that. But on this particular piece, I'm going to do 15 artist proofs, and I'll do an edition of 125. And it depends on the image and how much work is involved in pricing. There's a lot of different factors there that I look at to determine the edition size.
I believe we had a question over here. Oh.
Do they know at USF Graphic Studio what you do?
I think they do. I've actually trained a couple people that work there now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've had a
Okay.
couple people that have worked with me, assistants. And, you know, I've worked with them for a while. They really fine-tune their techniques. But I can't compete with Graphic Studio financially, you know, and pay them, you know, what Graphic Studio
But
can.
they don't do all this work that you do.
Oh, no. They don't spend any kind of time
No.
like this. And a lot of the work in Graphic Studio, they're photographically done. I shouldn't say a lot, but many of the pieces are done photographically to speed the process up. They're still etchings, but they're done photographically.
Well, do they ever send anybody down to train with you?
No, they don't. I'm not a
They
competitor or
should.
anything, but no. But I have a lot of respect for them, that, you know, what they're doing. And
When you do an edition of, say, 125, is that what you work on only, or are you working on other projects at the same time?
I'm always working on stuff. You can ask my wife. I see her once a week. I work on many projects, and what I generally do is, if I'm going to do an edition of 125, I'll print maybe 20 of these, and I'll have to have help, but I'll print a batch of them, I'll store them, and then I'll paint them as I need them. I try to keep around 10 pieces in stock of everything I have. So sometimes I'll run low on another image, so I have to stop, bring those plates out, and print enough of those to justify the time setting up. I try to print as many of these as I can when I'm set up to do it, because like I was talking about earlier, you have all these variables, and I keep elaborate notes on everything. But if there's like a 4 or 5 month delay between printing and then printing again, the setup and getting all those variables right takes a couple days. So I prefer to print as many as I can because of the setup time and the complication of the process. And I'd rather print these and have them in my drawers ready to paint rather than just printing them on demand. That would be real difficult. And it's even printing these and painting these, it's a long process. It doesn't, you know, it takes several weeks. After I print these, I have to wait about 2 weeks for the ink to totally dry. The ink is oil-based, and I'm using a water-based medium to paint on top of that. So I have to let the ink really dry for everything to work and be compatible.
I assume you archive your plates, and then do you go back and do, like years later, a restrike of a particular image?
I haven't done that, but I have a book that I have up in the exhibit that I've spent years on, 20 years on, it's over, you know, I don't know, incredible amount of time. And one thing a goal that I do have for myself is to go back and rework the plates just for that book, and maybe do an alphabet edition, an edition of 26. Every time I do one of these, it's a learning process. I grow from it. I learn new techniques. I refine my techniques, my vision, everything. And I would like to take that experience, especially with that particular book, and rework all 20 of the plates. And use different colors, maybe re-etch some of the areas and add things, take things away. And just do a small edition, just to see what I can do with that, because I've spent so much time on it. But that is one of my goals. But generally, I don't do any restrikes or anything like that.
All right, I see a hand over here.
Obviously, since you're spending so much time in your studio, because it takes so much, how much time are you spending out in nature finding your subjects? And do you work your pieces off of particular photographs that you've taken of a subject, of a particular bird? Or?
Yeah, I try to get out as much as I can. I'm in Ybor City, and there's a park close by about 6 blocks away, McKay Bay. I don't know if you've heard of that or not. And it used to be the city dump, but they've renovated that area, and I've counted over 100 species of birds there. I was just there Saturday morning, and I'll go over there for a couple hours Part of it because it's the convenience. It's right by my studio. I can go over there for a couple hours, then come back to the studio and put a day in. There's other places around Hillsborough County I like to go to, but it's a commitment time-wise. It's hard to go down there like to Cockroach Bay and go all the way down there. And it's such a great birding area. I get carried away when I start looking at birds. So. The time flies. 4 hours later, especially if I see a nice group of birds, I'm not in a rush to get back to the studio. But I try to get out as much as I can. I have a digital camera that I carry with me, great digital camera. It's got a 600 millimeter optical lens, and it's lightweight, so I can go out and take photographs of birds. And when I get back to the studio, I organize all those photographs. It actually takes longer for me to organize those photographs than actually going out in the field and taking them, because I put them in different files depending on the species and the time of the year. So when I'm ready to do a piece, all those images are organized so I can go back and look at my snail kite photographs. And they're all in one area. I don't have to look through 3 million photographs to find the snail kites. So I've already done all that preliminary work. But I carry that camera with me a lot and take thousands of photographs.
Okay. Thank you for so many years of this extraordinary work. And I wondered if you would comment on the recent article about you in Garden and Gun magazine, speaking of publications.
Well, she did an awesome job with the text writing about the process. And the gentleman that took the photographs was a really nice man. He was all excited about being at the studio. He spent like 3-4 hours at the studio. And she did a great job. I worked with her. I'm so excited about having that article in that magazine. They did an awesome job. When they first approached me, I looked at Garden and Gun and I thought, a hunting magazine? My birds? So I was a little reluctant, but then I did a little more research and discovered that it's a great magazine on Southern culture. So I was real honored for them to do a nice article about me in there, and it's very well done. I was extremely happy with that. It's brought more people to my site, just more people to follow my work. So I'm really happy about it. I've got another magazine that's doing an article soon too. Fine Books and Collections. You probably never heard of it, but they're doing a large article about me, which I'm excited about. But it's a great magazine. I'm so excited about having that take place. So. Well, thank you. Thank you.
When will that article be coming out?
Within the next couple of months. I'm not sure when, but she's been to the museum and she's taken photographs. I've given her photographs, and it looks like she's going to do a really good job. So I'm excited about it. And I think the Tampa Bay Times is doing something about me. That's coming out soon. She spent time here. She came to the studio. She was real excited. So any day now, they're going to do a large article about me. And their marketing person, Billy, he's been doing an awesome job with the marketing,
One more question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm curious about the spitting scientific process.
Okay.
pH balance, what help you for getting just the right spit?
Oh, you mean the spitting process? Oh, yeah, that's taken a lot of work. And I usually have the dry mouth after that from doing so much spit in there. I've tried other ways of doing it. There's photo flow, for instance. It's like a soapy substance they use for developing photographs. I've mixed that with not spit, but with my nitrate. Doesn't work. Only spit works, But it does a great job. There's something about the saliva, the way it spreads out in the water. Nothing else works. It does a great job. I even, in the past, when I couldn't get enough spit, I've got a couple people in the studio. It's like group spit, yeah? Just to mix this formula up. But it works.
My question is, have you ever been commissioned to do a particular bird?
I have. I've done a handful of commissions before. I don't do a lot of that because I'm so busy doing my own thing, but I have done actually several commissions. I have done that, so, and I will do it. So, and one of the things about etchings that I didn't go into it in great detail that I like, there's certain visual properties that this process has that's unique to the process, the blacks. You get incredible blacks with the process. The way the ink lays on the paper, it absorbs light rather than reflects it. And you can't paint a black that dark with acrylic or oils because the light would bounce off the surface because it's a plastic medium. But with this, it absorbs light, so there's a depth that it has. Really nice blacks. And another thing, too, is the range of values from that pitch black to really, really subtle light gray is so wide, much wider than the photograph. And another thing that I like about the process is the detail. Even just a small scratch in the plate creates a line. So you can get incredible detail with the process. There's a sensitivity it has. And with etchings, you can get right next to them, and they're still interesting to look at. A lot of art forms, you can't do that. You're forced to get back 5, 10 feet to really enjoy it. But it's you can get right next to them, and they're still captivating. So.
Do you have a favorite bird?
The one I'm working on. Which currently is the sandhill crane. So.
Any other questions out there?
One more. About 15 seconds to the ivory-billed woodpecker.
Okay. I've done an ivory-billed woodpecker. It's a great bird. They used to be in Florida. You know, and the last one in Florida this is an interesting story. This is the 1932, 1933, somebody had seen a pair in Maitland, and they had actually contacted Cornell, which is an ornithological university in New York, and they were known for their, bird research. They had told the president of the university that they had spotted 2 ivory bills in Florida. He stopped everything. They were rare at that time. He stopped everything, grabbed his bags, his wife. They got on the train, headed down to Florida. But before they got here, the 2 people that discovered those ivory bills went to Tallahassee, and they got permission to shoot them. You know? It's terrible. Terrible story, and now the 2 birds are in the museum in Gainesville, Florida Museum. But they got permission to shoot the birds because there was a bounty on them. You could make a good amount of money, but that's my Florida ivory bill sad story. So, but the ivory bills that I did a pair. They're actually upstairs in the show. I did a pair there. And the only known photographs were done in the early 30s in Louisiana. But it's an extinct species. So what I did is I actually went to the Field Museum in Chicago, and they let me in their zoology department, and they let me borrow 2 dead birds for a day. So I could do drawings of them and measure them. And, when you're looking at the dead birds, they look like darts. They're prone, and, and they really frown on opening the wings and things like that. So I couldn't do any of that. But I was able to get some great drawings of them and photographs, and I used those to do the 2 woodpeckers upstairs as a reference. So, and that's, no photographs. I just worked from 2 dead birds in a prone position to create that piece. So. Okay. All right.
Thank you, John, so much. I can honestly say I'm never going to look at your work the same way again. Obviously, we're big fans, but having insight into the process that goes into it, I look at it a whole different way. And so thank you very much for sharing your work with the History Center and the community. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Don't forget, the show runs through October the 15th, so if you haven't seen it, please come see it. And thank you all. Have a good night. Thank you. It was awesome. It was really good.
Oh, yeah, I have a small gallery there. Oh, yeah, by all means, I don't have